now we have Aaron Thigpen here of GameSpeed in Concord, California. And Aaron, you've been using PowerCranks now for how long?
For the past 3 years, I've been using the PowerCranks as part of a supplement of my sprint training.
Okay. And, well, personally you've been using them, and then you've also integrated them now into your business, which is to teaching other athletes how to improve their speed and game skills, right?
Correct. What I do here is performance training for athletes in a variety of sports. So that a big component of that is speed and acceleration, and we've integrated the PowerCranks into that program.
And you're a sprinter by nature, right?
That's correct.
Your background is 100-meter dash?
That's correct. I've been a 100-meter sprinter for the last 17 years, been on 11 U.S. national teams. So, that's been my background in athletics as a sprinter.
And since you started in PowerCranks, you're now a record holder, right?
Yeah, actually the first year I used the cranks, I set the age group record for 38-year-olds in 100 meters at a time of 10.34, so not bad for an old man. I think the cranks was a very integral part in that training, and a lot of it was kind of had to do with an injury I had, some tendonitis in the knee, and looking for an alternative way to supplement my sprint training with a non-impact form of training, and this was a great answer.
And when you saw these, so one of the things you told me was that form is very important, and the PowerCranks do an awful lot to help people improve their form. Is that correct?
Yeah. When you're getting up to the elite levels of sprinting, and even just at the entry levels, you want to have proper mechanics. And sometimes it's hard to communicate how you want that done in an athlete. And the PowerCranks is a good way to get the athlete doing that motion that you're trying to get, and for them to have that feel, to feel what they're supposed to do. And sometimes for some athletes, that's even better than a verbal instruction on how to do that. And it also starts to put the things that you want in the muscle memory of the athlete. So even if an athlete doesn't totally get it when you explain it, you can put them on the PowerCranks. Their body will go through it, and they'll start to adapt, and they'll be able to remember the pattern that you're actually trying to teach. So it's a good tool.
And that pattern you're trying to teach is?
Well, basically in sprinting and in running, you're talking about a rotational cycling of your sprint mechanics, where the foot actually comes up and around over the calf or over the knee, strikes down right underneath the center of gravity, or approximately a few inches in front of that. And with the PowerCrank, you're allowed to do that, whereas on a regular bike, you really can't mimic that mechanic that well. And again, sometimes some athletes don't really understand the concept.
Right. And because on the regular bike, the foot is pushed in the direction around.
Right.
And here we make them actively move the foot.
Exactly.
Right? So not only are we training the muscles necessary to do that, we're training the muscle memory.
That's right, yeah. We're getting the neurological patterning in there that really is key, because in sprinting, only one part of it is how much force you apply on the ground. You really, when you're talking about your elite level sprinters and your average athlete or your average sprinter, or even just runner in general, the better athletes or the quicker athletes tend to be able to produce a lot more force into the ground with the shortest amount of ground time. So actually your efforts are not necessarily to just push into the ground, but actually get off of the ground. And with the PowerCrank, you instantly get the feedback as to whether or not you're stalling on the ground or if you're coming up, which is what we would desire.
Let me focus in here on your leg and have you see if you can talk about this, show or demonstrate the difference between what we're talking about and going back and...
Well, normally when an athlete sprints who's not really trained in his running form, you'll see a back kick where the toe drops and the foot goes back straight like this. Well, on the cranks, you're forced to keep a dorsiflexion, in other words, a toe up action, so that you have no opportunity to let the knee drop and the foot to go back, or even let the toe point down. As soon as you get to here and you let that toe point down, the crank stalls. So you actually automatically get instant feedback on how you ride the bike. So you have to keep that dorsiflexion action, which means now you're cycling versus if I drop my toe, I stop. So you start to eliminate that aspect of their running. and they get, like I said, they get instant feedback.
You've noticed improvement in your own training from using these and seeing improved performance. But how about in the more average athletes that you're training? You usually are working mostly with high school kids?
Yeah, the range of my clientele will go anywhere from a 10-year-old up to a professional athlete. But I generally put most athletes on it because, again, of its teaching component, but also of its conditioning components. Because, again, this apparatus or these cranks allow you to strengthen the hip flexors, activate the glutes, the hamstrings, the soleus, all of the lower foot. So you integrate everything into the training action instead of just trying to, when you do drills, they're pretty much one-dimensional. You're maybe hitting one muscle group, two muscle groups. This integrates all of them, plus it works on the coordination of all those muscle groups working together, which is important.
And you tend, and my understanding is the way you tend to use these also is that you have the people on the bike, but after they have the bike, you like them to get off and do some running. Is that correct? To try to get that motion into their running motion.
Correct. It's great for them to ride the bike, but there's got to be some real-world application. So generally, what we will do is we'll have them do certain bouts on the bike, and then follow those bouts up with sprints or striding, so that way it really becomes ingrained into their running pattern, their running mechanics.
Can you see that change in the athletes as they come here and you see their mechanics? If you were to describe to another runner the changes you see in the stride, how would you describe that?
Well, a lot of times the changes are instantaneous. Some athletes even feel it, can really feel it. And even though they don't know what's happening, they can feel what's happening. And generally what will happen is you have less of what we call in track and field excess back kick, where the foot really reaches out and swings behind the body. You'll get a better form of striking the ground, coming right back up underneath the buttocks and stepping over. So you'll see more of a better front mechanics, where the foot cycles up and in front of the body, and decreased back mechanics, which is really where a lot of athletes have their problems in terms of speed. It's too much back kick. That's generally what I see when I work with athletes.
The triathletes I mostly am in contact with tend to report they report running improvement starting in about 2 weeks after starting on the PowerCranks. What's your experience as to when you said some occurs immediately, but what do you see as when you see improvement really start to happen?
It varies per athlete, but it can be, again, some athletes you'll see an immediate adaptation and they'll be able to lock it in. Others it can be a few more weeks. I'd generally say if you put an athlete on the cranks regularly, you're probably going to see an adaptation somewhere in between 2 and 3 weeks. For different athletes, different sports.
And you're doing it 2 to 3 times a week on average, or how often do your athletes use them?
Again, it varies on where they're at in their development and in their program. So some athletes will be in here, twice a week, and they're on it, working on speed. Some athletes are in it here twice a week, and they're doing more conditioning sorts of things.
Now, after somebody has adapted to the cranks, do you have them then do certain drills, like with the adjustable cranks, do you go to longer length cranks, or do you have them primarily work on leg turnover, or what are you
it depends on
size?
Yeah, it depends on what our goal is. So, basically the first thing is to get them comfortable with the cranks and focusing on the coordination. And you'd be surprised that a lot of times you get a lot of benefit just having that coordination, because a lot of us generally will have a stronger and a weaker side, a quicker and a slower side. So that in itself, just going through the first adaptation period where you're just working on being able to do it and having that coordination, starts to yield some results. From there, then you look at, okay, are we working on conditioning? Are we working on acceleration, speed, those sorts of things, and you adapt the program according. And then you may do short burst bouts, you may do long burst bouts, continuous riding, a whole variety of things. You can do, single leg things, you can do double leg, there's some pretty good possibilities and things that you can do with this.
And I noticed you've got the crank set up there pretty short. Is that because you've had some small kids on there, or is that you tend to use them? You think they're easier for people to start off with them short, or how? Why?
Yeah, we generally go with a shorter length right now because it's a little bit easier for them to get that feeling of the rotational action that we're really trying to teach. So a lot of times, and it's a little more universal when you have it shorter. I find the shorter you have it, the more you work on that kind of turnover aspect, and the longer you have it, the more you work on more of a power type of aspect. So it depends on, again, where they're at. I get a lot of people who come in here, so for me it's more convenient to keep it set at
so
the
you don't
short
change
length.
it all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Note any specific improvements that you've seen, or that you can? I know you do a lot of things. You just don't use PowerCranks.
Right.
These are just part of the program.
Right. Exactly.
You know.
Yeah. As far as improvements, again, it's kind of hard to really pinpoint what this, what percentage this adds to that. But what I do know is, again, the running mechanics, which is, where we're really going towards, it helps and aids in the acceleration of those guys adapting to that sort of thing.
So it really facilitates you teaching running mechanics, which
Right.
is what you've always tried to do.
Right.
But now
It's
they
another
can
tool.
make it easy to do.
Exactly. Because now it's something that they can feel kinetically, and it's not just a drawing on a board or just a drill, but it's something where they can go through the motion, immediately get off, run, and say, hey, yeah, I feel that, and that helps reinforce what we're trying to teach.
Very cool. How about, have you had any athletes who have been injured? Have you been using it in the injured guy?
Yeah, it's funny because I seem to have more success now with rehabbing people coming off of knee injuries than anything else. I'd have to say my injury, my record with guys with bad knees has been 100%, or with tendonitis and coming off of, I've had guys who've come off of broken legs, athletes off of broken legs, knee surgery, and this is one of the things that I put them on because, again, we go back to re-educating the body on the proper running action without having to run, so there's no impact. They can do it. They can strengthen the knee because of the strengthening aspects, conditioning aspects built into the cycling, and it's an all-around good sort of thing to help those guys bounce back a lot quicker without, when they go back to their running, having improper mechanics like limping and, breaking and a lot of the things that happen coming off an injury.
The other thing also is that when they've been injured, you will know that they're 50-50 right-left again before you're sending them back out to run hard, so it's a good way of you're gauging where they are in their recovery.
Yeah, because, you're going to get feedback based on the type of workouts that they're doing. So, as the intensity of the workout, moves along and they're holding their maybe they're pedaling or their cadence for a certain duration that's equal to the other leg, then, you're closer and closer to getting to where you want to be as far as going back out and running.
One of the things we anticipate with the better balancing of all the muscles that we're giving the people is that we would see fewer injuries, that we may reduce the incidence of injuries. I suspect that you have a sense of how frequently your athletes would get injured before. Have you noticed that has changed any since you started using PowerCranks in your athletes?
I can't really speak to that because there's so many different factors that play into when you're just, working with an athlete who maybe sees you 2 or 3 times a week and then is working with a high school coach or a team. So I can't really speak to that. In that regard, the only thing I can talk about is my own experience, in which case I didn't have any knee problems at all for that season. Now, they came to a point where I wasn't training, and then those things started to creep back. But, again, that's what happens with overuse injuries is, when you continue the activity but you don't continue the kind of supporting exercises that, allay those problems, then they're going to come back. But in my situation, I saw that it helped.
In the 3 years you've been on these, you've developed a lot of experience in helping people to integrate PowerCranks into their training regimen, in that either if an athlete really was interested in doing that, either you could help them specifically, they came here or other thing, or even as a consultant to teams or something who may be integrating these to help them to understand these into their particular program. Is that correct? Do you feel that there's benefit in agility? You talked about soccer players and football players, but in the because of the independent control we're giving them over their legs, do you think there's an agility component?
I think that plays into it in the fact of obviously better balance of the muscle groups on both sides of the body, and with the quicker foot response that you can train on this machine.
So now, how do you like to have the people positioned? Do you like to have their legs fairly bent, or do you like to have? Do you want them to be straight? Do you like them have to be at their toes down when they're at the bottom to try to reproduce a running motion? Do you pay any attention to how they're fit on the bike?
Sometimes I do. It just depends on what our goal is on the bike. For those athletes who are conditioning, I'm not as worried about the extension of the leg. For those who are more or less working on their sprinting, yes, then we'll start to change the elevation of the seat to simulate more of the foot stripe on the ground. But generally, I usually have them just set it for what's most comfortable for them, because again, a lot of times it's a matter of them learning the coordination.
Right.
So we go from there first.
Okay, and it's mostly in the beginning it's just conditioning and coordination, and then this the fine-tuning this thing is more of a later skill as they become okay. And you also a lot of people, do you like the people when they're working on their skills? Do you have them sit up like you are now?
We change it. Because,
you change it.
A lot of times it's most comfortable for athletes to sit up because they don't have the back strength and the abdominal strength, and that's one of the benefits of the bike is you start to develop that when you get into more of the forward postures. And it's important when you're talking about sprinting because these are the muscles that you're going to have to use. So most of the sprinters, I will require that they're in this position and they pedal from the beginning, from day one, in this position because you've got to condition, the action with the muscles.
Okay.
But yeah, you can go either way.
Either way. Well, a lot of people want to do what they're doing running and standing up, but in fact, it's a tougher. It's harder for them to actually be in the biking position, bent over a little bit, and as you said, it reproduces some of the sprinting, or say a football player runs.
Yeah, it's your initial acceleration position,
right,
which is pretty much common in all sports.
Right.
Again, when you're talking about speed in sports, you're really talking about the ability to accelerate. And most of the time, you don't get into an upright posture unless you're much later on, unless you've, caught the ball and, you're
right.
on a breakaway or something like that, or in track and field after you've gone through your first initial acceleration. After about 30 or 40 meters, you're up and running. But for most practical purposes in sports, in basketball, football, everything is short burst acceleration, which means you're most likely going to be in this position or some degree in between.
And I just dawned on me, but maybe for most athletes, the main difference between winning and losing is more their acceleration, how fast they get up to speed, as opposed necessarily what top end speed they get to.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
In most places, you don't get a chance to get top end speed, except in your track and field sort of situation. So, again, what we focus on here is the ability to accelerate, not necessarily the top end speed, unless you're in a sport that requires it.
Right.